It emerges from the Pine Barrens on a January night in 1909, and within 72 hours, an entire state stops functioning. Schools close, factories shut down, armed posses patrol the streets, and whatever left those cloven hoofprints in the snow, prints that climbed walls, crossed rooftops, and simply vanished mid-stride, nobody ever caught it. But the Jersey Devil didn't begin in 1909. It begins in 1735, in a place that was already considered cursed before anyone saw a single winged creature. The Pine Barrens of New Jersey are not what most people picture when they think of the American colonies. Stretching across more than 1 million acres of southern New Jersey, this vast wilderness of pygmy pines, cedar-dark rivers, and shifting sand is an almost impenetrable labyrinth. Early settlers called it the Pines and largely avoided it. The soil was too acidic to farm, the trees were too twisted and small for serious lumber. It was, by most colonial standards, worthless land, which meant the people who lived there were considered, by most colonial standards, barely worth noticing. One of those people was Jane Leeds. Accounts vary on the details, but most agree she was a woman of the pines, poor, exhausted, and pregnant for the 13th time. 13 children in an era when childbirth itself was a death sentence. 13 mouths to feed on land that produced almost nothing. When she felt the contractions begin, the story goes that she cursed the child outright. "Let this one be the devil," she allegedly cried. Some versions say it was a prayer born of despair. Others say it was genuine rage at God, at fate, at a life that had ground her down to nothing. What happened next, according to witnesses who claimed to be present, was that the child was born normal and then transformed. Wings burst from its back, its face elongated into something equine, something inhuman. It shrieked once, killed several people in the room, and vanished up the chimney into the Pine Barrens night. Now here's where the story gets genuinely interesting, because the Jersey Devil didn't just haunt one family or one village. It became, over the next 170 years, the most persistently reported cryptid in American history. Hundreds of sightings, multiple credible witnesses. Naval Commodore Stephen Decatur, a genuine war hero, reportedly fired a cannonball directly at the creature during a weapons test at Hanover Iron Works and watched it pass straight through. Joseph Bonaparte, brother of Napoleon and former King of Spain, reported seeing it while hunting on his Bordenton estate in the 1820s. These weren't superstitious peasants, these were men of standing, men who understood the cost of being laughed at. But here's what they don't tell you. Here's the part that gets buried under all the folklore and the creature features. The Pine Barrens weren't just home to Jane Leeds and her cursed offspring. They were sitting on top of one of the most significant iron deposits in colonial America. The bog iron found in those cedar swamps powered the furnaces that made cannonballs for the Revolutionary War. The Batstow Iron Works, the Atzian Furnace, the Hanover Works. These were industrial operations generating serious colonial-era wealth. And they ran on the labor of the Pineys, as outsiders called them, the insular, deeply poor communities who lived in the Barrens and whose alternative economy of charcoal burning, iron smelting, and subsistence farming was systematically dismantled as outside industrial interests moved in and claimed the land and the resource rights beneath it. The Piney communities were, in the language of the era, considered degenerate, and that word was not being used casually. In 1913, 4 years after the Great Panic of 1909, a eugenicist named Elizabeth Kite published a study commissioned by the New Jersey Reformatory. It was called The Pineys, and it designated the families of the Pine Barrens as hereditary degenerates, feeble-minded, morally deficient. The study was used to justify forced sterilization programs, real ones, state-sanctioned, aimed at the same communities already being dispossessed of their land, their livelihoods, and their dignity. Think about that sequence. First, you mythologize a community as devil-touched, devil-adjacent, the kind of people who birth monsters. Then you bring in scientific language to confirm what the myth already established. Then you take their land, sterilize their children, and call it progress. The Jersey Devil wasn't just a campfire story, it was infrastructure for dehumanization. And the panic of 1909, that week in January when the entire state essentially collapsed in fear, newspapers ran with it. The Philadelphia papers, the Camden papers, the Atlantic City papers. They published eyewitness accounts daily, sometimes multiple editions in a single day. Circulation exploded. One newspaper reportedly offered a $10,000 reward for the creature's capture. That's roughly $340,000 in today's money, a sum they were absolutely certain they'd never have to pay. The panic was a product. The terror was content. The Pineys were the raw material. Sound familiar? The architecture of this is identical to every modern moral panic you've ever lived through. Take a marginalized community, attach a supernatural or criminal narrative to them, amplify it through the most profitable media channels available, watch engagement, and in 1909 that meant newspaper sales, go vertical. The medium changes, the playbook doesn't. The Jersey Devil is still being actively monetized today. The NHL franchise that plays in Newark chose it as their mascot. The Pine Barrens, that same land taken from the Piney communities, is now a protected national reserve, which sounds noble until you learn that protection also means development restrictions that froze out the remaining indigenous communities while tourism dollars flow to outsiders. Devil-themed tours, haunted trail packages. The creature that was used to stigmatize an entire people is now a $12 ticket and a gift shop hoodie. The real demon of this story was never born in a farmhouse in 1735. It was born in the decision to look at a poor woman on her 13th child and see a monster in the making. Jane Leeds, if she existed at all, was not a witch. She was a woman at the absolute edge of what a human being can endure, and the community around her chose mythology over mercy. The Jersey Devil gave people permission not to care. It's much easier to imagine that something terrible lives in those woods than to reckon with the very ordinary evil of poverty, exploitation, and deliberate neglect. So here's the question I want you to sit with. Which communities today are being assigned their own version of the Jersey Devil, their own dehumanizing mythology, so that the rest of us don't have to look too hard at what's actually happening to them? And who profits when we keep believing the monster story? If this made you think differently about a legend you thought you knew, you know what to do. Subscribe, because next time we're going somewhere even darker.